There's a place at the bottom of the world wrapped in silence, a continent so cloaked in snow and stillness that even time seems to forget its name. Antarctica, vast, frozen, uninhabited, or so we're told. But what if that silence wasn't natural? What if it wasn't the snow, but a memory, gently buried? You see, long before the ice, this land may have known sunlight, lush valleys, running rivers, life, and long before modern science found it empty, ancient hands may have drawn it. We won't chase theories tonight. We'll drift, through parchment, through old libraries, through maps inked by candlelight, and we'll begin not with discovery, but with confusion. In 1513, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis compiled a map, drawn on gazelle skin, pieced together from older sources, a patchwork of coastlines from lost empires and shipwrecked stories. It charted parts of Europe, Africa, and something strange. At the map's southern edge, an outline appears, craggy, sweeping, unmistakably land. But not just land, Antarctica, centuries before it was discovered, and drawn not with ice, but with what appeared to be bare, rocky coasts, as if someone had seen it long ago, before the snow. Piri Reis himself wrote a note in the margins that his sources came from ancient sea charts, that they dated back to explorers far older than memory, and then he left us the map, just that, no names, no explanations, just coastlines whispering from the edge of the known world. Modern scholars have studied it. Some say it's coincidence, others say it's cartographic error, but those who look closer notice something more, that the shape of the coastline, its dips and peninsulas, closely matches modern scans of ice-free Antarctica, taken by satellite and sonar. It's not proof, but it's strange. Strange enough to wonder, what if someone once walked there? What if they knew the shape of the world, long before compasses spun south? What if the map that shouldn't exist does? And so we begin. Not with answers, not with claims, just with a scroll of gazelle hide, a shape no one should have known, and the unsettling calm of a land drawn in memory, not imagination. The snow covers all now, but beneath it, perhaps a coastline still remembers, and as we follow it inward, we leave behind the parchment and step softly onto the frost-kissed edge of a land buried not just in snow, but in time. Next we drift into the deep quiet of ice-covered secrets, where the weight of glaciers holds stories still waiting to stir. The wind moves slowly here. It doesn't howl. It hushes. It skims across miles of untouched whiteness, grazing ridgelines and drifting through crevasses like breath through sleeping lungs. Antarctica is quiet, but beneath the stillness lies stone, and beneath the stone, a memory deeper than cold. Long ago, longer than most maps admit, this continent wasn't frozen. It was green, alive, a world of towering trees, tangled underbrush, and warm inland seas, not in the way fairy tales remember forests, but in the way geology remembers life, through fossils. We begin our descent not with spades, but with time, and we step carefully into places where the ice has cracked just enough to whisper back. In 1986, in a windswept stretch of the Transantarctic Mountains, researchers uncovered something unexpected. Leaves. Not frozen leaves, but fossilized ones, pressed into ancient rock like delicate stamps. Their veins were intact, their curves familiar. Not just any leaves either. Tropical species, ferns, conifers, even palm-like varieties. Here, in a place where modern temperatures never rise above freezing, once grew forests dense enough to shelter creatures and cast shade. A few years later, in the Seymour Island region near the Antarctic Peninsula, paleontologists found bones, vertebrae, teeth, footprints, the remains of ancient reptiles and eventually dinosaurs. Some were marine reptiles, those made for swimming in prehistoric seas, but others walked, breathed, nestled in mosses, died under trees, and nearby, tiny impressions, pollen grains preserved in sediment, microscopic but eloquent, telling us not only what grew, but when, 30 million years ago, 50 million, in some cases more than 100 million, long before our species, long before the continents shifted into their current dance, Antarctica was part of a different world, a place of spring and shadow, not silence and snow. But the Earth moves, it tilts, it drifts, and Antarctica, once nestled closer to the equator, began its slow southern march. As it drifted, the warmth faded, winds changed, currents shifted, and glaciers, slow as memory, began to slide over what was. It didn't happen in an instant. It took millions of years, but the result was complete. A continent once alive, now sealed beneath miles of ice. And yet, somewhere deep beneath that white shell, the stone remains, and the stone still holds echoes. In 2012, radar scans from NASA and European teams revealed mountain ranges buried under the East Antarctic ice sheet. One range, the Gamburtsev Mountains, rises higher than the Alps. No human has ever seen them. They are encased in more than 2 miles of frozen stillness. And yet their peaks, unseen for millions of years, once stood above ground, perhaps sheltering forests, creatures, even civilizations we have not imagined. Of course, we have no proof of people, no carvings, no tools, no bones shaped by thought. But there's something in the symmetry of the stone, in the way the mountains run like spines, in the way old riverbeds seem to map paths through now vanished valleys, and in the way ice moves, slowly but with memory. You see, glaciers do not erase, they preserve, they press and entomb, and sometimes they protect, which is why researchers now speak softly about what might lie beneath. Not cities, not ruins, not temples drawn in gold, but structures of a different kind, geothermal ridges, unusual formations, shapes that seem almost regular, almost intentional, buried so deeply they're read only in data, in shadows cast by radar waves, in patterns too consistent to ignore, but too subtle to claim. And so we wonder, as we drift deeper into the white, could a civilization have existed, not during our history but before it, when Antarctica was green, when the poles were warm and the sky carried more carbon, more heat, more breath? Could people, some kind of people, have walked here before the freeze? We do not know, but the fossils do. They whisper of life in impossible places, of forests now frozen, of ferns that once unfolded beneath ancient suns. And even if no cities ever stood here, perhaps something else did. A culture not built in stone, but in silence. One that vanished not because it was lost, but because the snow fell slowly, layer by layer, until it was no longer gone, just covered. And as the ice thickened, the air cooled, and Antarctica drifted into sleep, but the stone remains. And sometimes, when the sun hits the mountains just right, and the wind shifts across the plateaus, it feels almost as if the land is remembering something. Not loudly, not clearly, just enough to stir, and that stirring leads us onward, towards something buried not just in sediment, but in secrecy, something below the frozen lakes, beneath the oldest ice, in a place few have ever touched, a place where a body of water has remained sealed for millions of years, untouched by sun or air, Lake Vostok, and whatever sleeps beneath its glassy prison. Before there was ice, there was light, not the pale gleam that glints off modern glaciers, but golden sunlight that filtered through leaves, that warmed shallow waters, that kissed the backs of animals now long extinct. Antarctica, before its transformation, was not a land of extremes. It was temperate, fertile, a world with seasons, not silence. And to understand what it once was, we must shift our gaze, not just downward, into the layers of rock and ice, but backward, into the tilt of the earth. You see, the world spins with a gentle wobble. Over tens of thousands of years, this wobble shifts the way sunlight touches the poles. And at different points in geological time, Antarctica was angled not toward shadow, but toward light. There were epochs, long patient stretches of time when the land basked in warm breezes, when the southern ocean flowed differently, bringing heat from the equator, when volcanoes beneath the crust pulsed softly, adding warmth from below. During the Eocene epoch, roughly 50 million years ago, something extraordinary happened. Palm trees grew in Antarctica. That's not a metaphor, it's a fossil fact, Tiny pollens and full-leaf imprints found across the continent tell the story of forests that stretched wide and high, of ecosystems that may have rivaled modern temperate rainforests, of birds that nested in canopy shade, and of mammals, small, ancient ones, that rustled through underbrush we can no longer see. These weren't short-term flukes. This warmth lasted millions of years, enough time for species to evolve, for valleys to shape stories, for life to find its rhythm. And when we imagine this place, it helps to slow down, to picture it not as we know it now, but as it was then. The sky, high and open, painted with soft clouds. The trees, tall and swaying in southern winds. The ground, soft with moss, dappled with fern shadows. And the light, steady and golden. It's hard to connect this image with the white vastness we know today. But the rocks remember, they've kept the story hidden, layered beneath glaciers, and when ice cores are drilled, when sediment is sampled, the story seeps back into view. And yet, something changed. The warmth didn't vanish all at once. It receded. Like a tide drawn slowly away, the warmth withdrew. Climate shifted. Earth's orbit adjusted. Green became frost. Frost became snow. And snow became glaciers, pressing the life out of valleys that had once sung with bird calls. The ice came slowly, but thoroughly. By the time humans began to map the world, Antarctica was already sealed, a land locked in myth and cloud, and yet perhaps some echo of its warm past lingered in memory, in whispers passed down in seafaring tales, in maps drawn from older maps, in stories of a southern land once touched by sun. That's why the old cartographers puzzled over the idea, not because they imagined a continent of penguins and snow, but because something older, warmer, and greener had been remembered. Not remembered clearly, just enough to mark its place, to ink its edges. And that's what makes the story of Antarctica so quietly strange. It wasn't always cold. It wasn't always barren. And in the warm chapters of Earth's life, this place may have held more than trees. Because warmth invites life, and life leaves traces, even under ice. And so the past remains there, still warm in its own way, held tight beneath the frozen lid. But the most curious part is not just the memory of warmth, it's what warmth still remains. In the heart of Antarctica, despite the crushing weight of ice, there are places that radiate heat, geothermal currents that rise from the Earth's crust, volcanic whispers that haven't gone quiet. And in one such place, buried 2 miles below the surface, a body of water has remained liquid for millions of years. A lake without wind, without sunlight, without contact. Lake Vostok. It has never seen the sky. No bird has skimmed its surface. No leaf has floated on its waves. And yet it exists. Still, in silence. And that silence calls scientists across the world. Not with urgency, but with wonder. Because if warmth once bathed this land, and warmth still flickers beneath it, then what rests in the space between? Between warmth and cold, between memory and myth, between ice and water. And so we descend gently toward Lake Vostok, not to disturb but to listen, to wonder what secrets might drift through water untouched by time. Lake Vostok does not ripple. It does not crash or swell. Its surface, if it could be called that, has not moved in millions of years. Pressed beneath more than 2 miles of unbroken glacial ice, it rests in perfect darkness, sealed so tightly that even the weight of time cannot leak in. And yet the water is there, liquid, alive in its own quiet way, cradled by bedrock, warmed from below by the slow pulse of Earth's geothermal breath. It is not the only subglacial lake in Antarctica, but it is the largest. Roughly the size of Lake Ontario, stretching silently beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet, a buried sea, untouched, unseen, unspoiled by air. Above it snow has fallen for millennia, layers upon layers compressing into crystal-clear ice, each year's snowfall creating another translucent chapter, another seal on a story too delicate to speak aloud. And still, beneath it all, water waits. When scientists first confirmed its existence, they did not celebrate. They listened. They watched seismic data, traced radar echoes through the ice, and gradually the lake revealed itself, not in photographs, but in reflections. not in splashes, but in stillness. There are currents in this lake, slow movements of water too subtle for waves, eddies that drift through complete darkness. And on those soft, unseen currents, something moves. Samples drawn from the surrounding ice that once touched the lake before freezing upward, carry whispers of organic material, simple cells, microbes, nothing dramatic, nothing definitive, just life, or something very much like it. Not modern life, not bacteria from the surface, but sealed strains, ancient signatures. When the samples were tested, scientists found sequences that didn't match known classifications. Not alien, not alarming, just unfamiliar, unmapped, and it made them pause, because what could survive in a place like that? No sunlight, no surface nutrients, no seasons, no tides, only pressure, heat, and silence. Yet somehow the lake hums. It carries warmth from the earth below. Minerals leach in from bedrock. Tiny ecosystems may cling to thermal vents, sustained not by the sun, but by the steady breath of a living planet. And that opens a quiet door, not to fantasy, but to possibility. If life can persist there in total isolation, what else might it remember? What else might rest beneath the lake, not as cells, but as stories? Because buried valleys surround it, caverns shaped by ancient tectonics, ridges that ripple through sonar maps with strange regularity, and as technology improves, the outlines become clearer. Not of buildings, not of ships, but of patterns, grids and curves that seem too symmetrical to ignore. Skeptics call it coincidence. They may be right, but the question lingers in the still water. Not because we need it to be something more, but because the land won't let us forget that it once was. If there was ever a civilization here, one that thrived during Antarctica's warm epochs, it wouldn't have lasted long after the freeze began. But perhaps they saw it coming. Perhaps they built downward, not in panic but in reverence, preserving not themselves but what they knew. Some legends, distant quiet ones, speak of a race that lived underground, in harmony with the earth's heat. Not on this continent, not in one place, but as a motif that appears across cultures, the hidden people, the ones who retreated below when the skies changed. There is no proof, only parallels, and in a lake that no one has seen, beneath a sheet of ice that has never melted, we feel the weight of that possibility. Lake Vostok remains sealed, deliberately. No full drilling has reached its core without contamination. Some believe we must protect it. Others fear what disturbing it might reveal, not in menace, but in mystery. Because if something lives down there, if something ancient drifts in those black waters, it has done so in complete silence, and that silence is sacred. There are some things the earth keeps to itself, not out of secrecy, but out of stillness, and Lake Vostok may be one of them. A preserved pocket of deep time, a world within a world, untouched since before the last great extinction, and maybe, just maybe, a place that remembers more than we do. The ice above it groans sometimes. It shifts. It breathes. Not fast enough for human ears, but if you wait long enough, the creaking becomes a language. And what it says is nothing final, nothing solved, only that beneath our feet is not just cold, but memory. And from the edges of that memory, the landscape begins to change. Vast mountain ranges rise silently beneath the ice, hidden for millennia, and these ranges, these unseen walls, are next, not just because they're there, but because they might once have cradled something more than snow. The ice remembers everything. It does not speak, not in voices or stories, but in layers, quiet, translucent pages of time stacked one upon another. Each snowfall, each gust of ash, each distant eruption is pressed gently into the deepening cold, never shouted, only kept. And when we want to listen, we drill, not forcefully, not quickly, but with precision. A long, thin column drawn slowly upward from the depths, like pulling a memory from sleep. Ice cores are among the most honest archives on Earth. They carry not just water, but whispers of atmosphere, of volcanic dust, of pollen and sea salt and cosmic debris. Each inch is a season, each meter a century, and the deeper we go, the stranger it becomes. From the surface, Antarctica feels like an endless present, but buried within, it becomes a past that stretches further than we can see. Some cores go back 800,000 years, others a million. In their depths, there are traces of times when carbon filled the air, when warmth pulsed across the poles, when ice thinned and reformed like breath. And in between those rhythms, strange anomalies, thin bands of ash with no matching eruption, tiny flecks of meteorite clustered oddly close, sharp shifts in trapped gas composition as though something changed suddenly and without clear reason. We don't know what caused them, only that they're there, moments in the record when something disrupted the slow pulse of time, moments when Antarctica shivered, not from weather, but from something deeper. Some of the dust particles in the oldest cores aren't local. They drifted from thousands of miles away, carried by upper atmosphere currents from vanished landscapes, fragments of plant life, molecules never found in the modern polar air, not evidence of people, not tools or bones, but shadows of ecosystems that stretched far wider than the ice now allows. And sometimes, even stranger signals emerge. In 1999, researchers analyzing deep cores from Dome C, a high ridge in East Antarctica, found unexpected spikes in deuterium, a heavier form of hydrogen. These spikes didn't follow known climate patterns. They suggested sudden bursts of warmth, brief pulses that rose and faded too quickly to fit natural cycles. The warmth didn't last, but something had pushed it upward, some event or process that left no visible scar, only a fingerprint in the frozen breath of ancient snow. We are taught to trust slow change, to believe the Earth moves gently, but every so often the ice tells a different story. It speaks of quiet interruptions, of years that don't fit, of atmospheric puzzles that no model has yet solved. Could a distant impact have stirred the air? Could deep volcanic systems have flared without breaking the surface? Could the death or rise of a long-lost forest have altered the sky? The ice doesn't say. It only keeps the memory. And as we read deeper, we begin to sense a rhythm, a kind of buried heartbeat. Long periods of cold, then slow warming, then a pause, then warmth again, as if something was breathing beneath the glacier. A cycle, not chaotic. Deliberate. Almost watched, and that feeling intensifies when we align the ice core records with data from around the world. Deep sea sediments, stalagmites from ancient caves, lakebed pollen samples. Somehow they sync. Shifts in Antarctica appear in Europe. Changes in gas here mirror those in Greenland, as if the planet once moved together in harmony. And then it stopped. Somewhere in the recent geological past, the harmony fractured, temperatures diverged, cycles broke, Antarctica closed itself off, the ice thickened faster, snow no longer melted in summer, and whatever warmth once slipped between the mountains retreated, never to return. It was as if the continent turned inward, pulling a blanket of silence across its skin. But the cores still sing, not loudly, not clearly, but in a language of pressure and purity, of trapped gases and layered dust. They speak of a world that may have once been more connected than we now remember. And if there was connection, if warmth once tied distant lands in unseen patterns, perhaps something walked across those patterns, not in our time, not in our shape, but with intention. We do not chase myths here. We only listen to signals faint as frost and steady as breath. And when those signals rise from the deepest cores, we follow them, not with shovels, but with stillness, because down there, below even the ice and lake, the mountains begin. Not the ones on the maps, but the secret ones. The buried range that no one had seen, and yet had always been there. The ones taller than the Alps, sharper than thought, hidden not just by snow, but by forgetting. And those mountains, those silent giants, might be the oldest guardians of all. They rise where no eye can see them. The Gamburtsev Mountains, sharp, jagged, and immense, stretch across the heart of East Antarctica, entirely concealed beneath nearly 3 kilometers of ice. No explorer has ever climbed them. No sunlight has touched their peaks in millions of years. Yet they are there, as real as any known range, as ancient as the Earth itself, discovered not by sight, but by sound, by radar echo and seismic murmur. They emerged in the 1950s during a Soviet survey expedition. What was thought to be flat, undisturbed land gave way to something far stranger, a vast and crumpled spine of rock running silently beneath the coldest place on Earth. Their name, Gamburtsev, is just that, a name, a label for something that resists being named, because these mountains don't behave like others. Geologically, they're a puzzle. Most mountain ranges form near tectonic boundaries, where plates grind and lift, but the Gamburtsevs are deep inland, surrounded by stable craton, rock that should not crumple. And yet they have soaring ridges, deep-cut valleys. Some peaks stretch as high as the Alps, yet they hide with perfect stillness. Scientists don't fully understand why they're there. Some theories suggest an ancient rift zone reactivated long ago. Others propose glacial carving before the Great Freeze. But none of the explanations are complete. None of them explain the symmetry, the order, the strange perfection of the buried forms. In 2009, a major international expedition deployed ice-penetrating radar, gravity sensors, and seismic tools to map the range more clearly. What they found deepened the mystery. Long, parallel valleys, unusual ridgelines that do not appear to be shaped solely by erosion, basins that sit far below what glacial activity would normally carve, and in some areas, patterns, repetitive forms that don't quite match what we see in surface mountain ranges. These aren't ruins, they're not cities, but they're also not chaotic. There's a rhythm to them, a quiet geometry, and surrounding the base of these peaks are smooth, basin-like depressions, wide and shallow, like forgotten lakes. Some believe water once pooled here, warmed by geothermal vents, flowing beneath thin glacial ice during the early days of Antarctica's freeze. Others wonder whether these basins served as something else, a gathering point, a crossing, a shelter. Not for modern humans, not even necessarily for people, but for something. Some life form, some intelligence that adapted to the coming cold. It's easy to drift too far with these thoughts, to build castles of speculation on peaks no one has seen. But the data remains, the scans remain, and the range remains, unchanged, unmoved, unwilling to explain itself. Its silence is not empty, it's full, weighted, patient. What makes the Gamburtsevs so remarkable is not just their scale or mystery, but their preservation. Elsewhere in the world, wind and water wear mountains down. But here, the ice acts as armor, a perfect seal. The air never touches them. The seasons never shift them. They are kept in a kind of suspended memory, neither eroded nor exposed, their jagged beauty unaltered across eons, which means that what lies among them, between their peaks, along their hidden ridgelines, may also be preserved, not buried ruins, not pyramids or temples, but something quieter, patterns of stone, shaped sediment, fossils not of creatures, but of choices, paths, clearings, spaces once used and then forgotten. Because if life once existed here, when the land was green, when the rivers ran and warmth rose from below, this would have been a sanctuary, a place beyond the reach of rising tides, sheltered from storms, high enough to see, low enough to hide, and now it is locked in frost, tucked beneath what we call permanence. But the ice won't last forever. Already, parts of the East Antarctic sheet show signs of thinning. Not fast, but enough. And satellite scans grow sharper each year. What was once pure white is now being mapped in layers, in shadows, in spectral gradients. And in those maps, the mountains breathe, not with motion, but with presence. Like sleepers beneath heavy blankets, their shapes rise gently from the depth. And those who study them begin to speak differently. Not in headlines, not in proclamations, but in questions. Why here? Why this shape? Why so preserved? No theory quite holds, no answer quite fits. So instead, we listen. To the weight of the glacier. To the slow sigh of the radar. To the pressure echoing through rock older than language. And we begin to understand that mystery doesn't need resolution. It only needs space. The Gamburtsevs are not asking to be solved. They are asking to be remembered, and as we drift across their unseen peaks, their icy silhouette becomes a cradle, one that may have held not just stone, but story. And that story seems to lead somewhere deeper, not into the mountains, but beneath them, toward places where warmth lingers strangely, where ice thins despite the cold, where readings spike and maps blur. Because down there, near the southern edge of the range, heat rises, not just from the Earth's core, but from something else, something warm and hollow. The cold in Antarctica is ancient. It wraps the continent in layers of silence so complete, even time seems to slow. But beneath all that frost and stillness, something unexpected stirs. Heat, not everywhere, not evenly, but in pulses, localized, precise, and quietly persistent. The Earth's crust is never truly cold. Even in the most frozen corners of the world, geothermal energy rises from deep below, a soft exhale from the planet's molten heart. But in certain parts of Antarctica, that warmth concentrates. It moves upward in narrow streams, threading between rock and ice like breath through a sleeping chest. And where that heat meets ancient water or hidden basins, the ice thins. Not from above, but from within. Satellite measurements have shown subtle melting in unexpected places. Basal meltwater, thin ribbons of liquid gliding between the ice sheet and bedrock. In these regions, the ice shifts more easily. It flows differently. It sings differently. And one of those places lies near the southern edge of the Gomburtsev Range, where radar has picked up not only heat, but hollows, voids, large ones. Not caves exactly, but zones where the ice is not solid, where the radar echoes bounce too far, too softly, as if something open rests below. Some of these anomalies measure several kilometers across. Some form shapes that are difficult to categorize, rounded here, angular there, not natural? Perhaps. Not unnatural? Also perhaps. The data is incomplete. The continent does not give up its secrets easily, but the warmth persists. In one study, researchers traced a steady upwelling of heat from a volcanic plume beneath Maribird Land, nowhere near the coast, deep within the interior. It wasn't active in the way surface volcanoes are. It didn't erupt, but it warmed everything above it, enough to create subglacial lakes, enough to thin the ice, enough to suggest that the crust there is not quite as stable as it seems. And where there is heat, there can be life. Not surface life. Not birds or mammals, but microbial ecosystems. Bacteria adapted to darkness. Simple organisms feeding on minerals, thriving in places no human eye has ever seen. That's what scientists look for now, not ruins or artifacts, but warmth, because warmth leaves clues. It creates movement. It shapes the glacier from below, and in at least one place it has created a cavity so large and sudden researchers were startled when it appeared. In 2019, data revealed a hollow space the size of Manhattan beneath the Thwaites Glacier, one of the fastest changing ice masses in West Antarctica. The cavity wasn't visible at the surface. It wasn't there decades ago, but now it exists, formed by basal melt, carved by hidden heat. And when discoveries like this surface, they remind us that Antarctica is not a static vault. It's a moving, breathing part of the planet. It shifts, it hides, it changes shape even while appearing frozen in place. Some of the hollows hold only water, others hold silence. But deep within the continent, near ancient ridges and beneath weighted peaks, the warmth seems to do more than just melt. It organizes, it concentrates, it repeats. There are patterns in the geothermal maps that feel strange, not in a conspiratorial way but in a mathematical one. Grid-like patterns, equidistant points of melt, symmetries that suggest not randomness but rhythm. Perhaps it's coincidence, perhaps it's artifact. But when those patterns align with radar scans showing strange elevations, subtle platforms, shallow terraces, the mind begins to wonder. Could warmth have drawn someone here? Not now, not in modern history, but once, before the freeze, before the snow, when this place was still green. Could someone or something have known where the heat was strongest and chosen to settle near it, not to build monuments, but to endure, not to conquer, but to hide, not above ground, but beneath it? And if they did, what would be left now? Nothing we could recognize. No metal, no language, no signal that would survive the crushing silence of ice. But perhaps an echo, a shape, a hollow place, kept warm not by design, but by accident, or by the Earth's own quiet sympathy. There is a growing belief among some researchers that we must reimagine the history of our planet's extremes, not as unbroken timelines, but as waves, not as deserts, but as archives. And if Antarctica is an archive, then warmth is the key. Because where the warmth lingers longest, the past may be closest to the surface. Beneath all this, the ice continues to shift. It glides over stone shaped by fire. It flows above faults and fissures and geothermal springs, and in doing so, it hints at a deeper architecture, one we cannot yet name. But we feel it, in the heat, in the voids, in the way the land seems to exhale when measured carefully enough, a land that was never truly empty, only waiting. And from this breath we turn to the ridges once thought to be random, to the shapes in the stone, to a range that appears not just warm, but structured, where a memory in the land seems to form something older than the ice, and perhaps older than us. It doesn't rise high, not like the Gamburtsevs, sharp and secretive. This formation, this ridge, barely lifts its head above the bedrock, but it runs long and straight, longer than it should, straighter than chance prefers, a line of elevation beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet that continues for miles without the natural drift of geology. It was first noticed during a survey of subglacial topography. At first, it seemed like just another fold in the landscape. But then came the repetition, parallel ridges, even spacing, a rhythm in the stone. These weren't mountains, they weren't carved by glaciers, they didn't follow the patterns left by ice flow or tectonic lifting. They sat differently, flatter, more measured. And in certain places, the ridge formed gentle arcs, segmenting into terraces like steps too large for any foot, too shallow for erosion alone. Researchers hesitated. They labeled it anomalous. They left it for later. But in the years that followed, new scans added detail. Radar imagery refined the contours. Magnetic readings suggested density variations beneath the ridgeline, and gravity mapping revealed hollows beneath, elongated chambers aligned with the surface formations. Still, there were no artifacts, no inscriptions, no clues left behind, only a shape, a geometry, and geometry in the natural world is rare in repetition. Some suggested the ridge might be the remnant of a long-eroded volcanic uplift. Others argued for buried fault lines, remnants of ancient continental collisions. But the symmetry remained. In satellite images, color-coded and layered with data overlays, the ridge stood out like a scar. Not jagged, not angry, just persistent. It ran east to west, then curved gently southward, following no river, avoiding no obstacle. Just there, a spine beneath the ice. And what made it stranger were the anomalies that clustered near it. Small changes in magnetic field intensity, localized geothermal warmth, thin zones in the overlying ice sheet, places where the glacier seemed lighter, as if something once stood there, or perhaps still does. Not buildings in the way we understand them, not towers or walls, but structures shaped into the land, built low to endure, or grown, not constructed at all, but formed through interaction. Stone shaped by intent. It's a quiet theory, one not found in textbooks, but whispered between researchers after long weeks on ice. A wondering, not a claim, because Antarctica is too large for certainty, too hidden for quick answers. And this ridge does not shout. It hums, a deep, low presence beneath the snow, like a breath held too long. If someone once lived here, if something once organized the land with thought rather than chance, this is where they might have begun, not in grandeur, but in alignment, not in monuments, but in lines. Because a ridge like this could be many things. It could have marked territory, guided travelers, channeled water or energy or migration. Or it could be the remnant of something ceremonial. If ceremony once belonged to whoever moved across these warm lands before the freeze. And perhaps nothing moved. Perhaps it was nature. Perhaps the ice found structure where none was meant. But the feeling remains, the same feeling one gets when walking through ruins overgrown by forest. A hush, a hesitation, as if the land remembers even when the surface forgets. In some scans, smaller formations seem to branch from the ridge, perpendicular lines, shorter segments, almost like an outline, an unseen blueprint. Again, the data does not scream significance. It only offers patterns, and in a place where almost everything is chaos, crushed ice, wind-carved voids, chaotic geology, a pattern is sacred. No digging has reached this ridge. The ice above is too thick, too precious. To breach it would be to risk contamination, distortion, misunderstanding. So we watch from above. We listen with instruments. We model and map and wait. And in that waiting, the ridge becomes more than stone. It becomes an idea, a bridge between what we know and what we've yet to ask. What if memory lives in shape, not written down, not passed through language, but embedded in design? What if intention can last longer than culture, longer than bones, longer than ice? The forgotten ridge does not answer. It remains low, quiet, consistent. And somewhere along its length, a new scan shows an interruption, a flattened depression, perfectly centered, slightly concave. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps a crater. But its edges are smooth. Its depth is even. Its ratio is elegant. A feature not shaped by force, but by repetition, as if something moved in circles there, again and again, long before the snow began to fall. And as our instruments pause over that place, the ice shifts faintly above. Not from weight, from warmth. Another current, another pulse, as if the ridge, forgotten by time, still remembers how to glow. Not all discoveries are announced. Some arrive as unease, a pause in the field notes, a discrepancy between samples, a shape in the sediment that doesn't quite belong. The ridge had given them a shape, but what came next was smaller, simpler, sharper. It began during a routine geological survey, core sampling in a shallow zone of ancient moraine near a subglacial depression not far from the ridge's southern arc. Most of what the team extracted was predictable: compacted gravel, glacial dust, shards of ancient volcanic glass, and then something different, oblong, tapered, edges chipped in a way that defied randomness. Just a fragment, gray, smooth, heavy for its size. It wasn't metallic. It didn't glitter, but it didn't match the rock around it either. It bore no writing, no inscription, only the suggestion of design. When rotated, it fit against the hand more comfortably than chance would allow. Not perfectly, but with familiarity, like a shape the body already knew. More pieces followed, not many, less than a dozen, scattered through layers estimated to be more than 400,000 years old. Some curved, some flat, all marked with striations too deliberate to be explained by glacial scraping. These were not tools in the modern sense. They were not weapons or art. They were edges, points, simple instruments, or impressions of them. Some researchers called them glacial flukes. Others hesitated, because the pattern of breaks, the angle of the pressure marks, the repeated tapering, these did not follow the chaos of ice. They suggested impact, control. Still, nothing was confirmed. The fragments were archived, catalogued with care, filed under anomalies. But in private notes, the language softened. The phrasing changed. May have been held. Appears intentionally flaked. Chipped in a manner not typically found in situ rock. They were careful not to say what they feared, or hoped, because to name them tools would be to pull everything closer. Too close. It would suggest presence. And presence is harder to explain than warmth, harder than shapes in stone. Presence implies witness, choice, the intelligence. And yet these pieces remain, quietly marked, gently discussed. Occasionally a study will mention artifactual lithics, always with caveats, always buried in the appendix, because no one wants to be the first to say, we may not have been alone, not alone in the timeline, not alone on the land. There are parallels, of course. In Africa, tools have been found dating back over 2 million years, simple ones, stones shaped by thought, and in other corners of the world, Asia, Europe, South America, tools appear long before civilization. So why not here? Why not on the continent that once knew forests and rivers and light? The problem is context. In Africa, the tools were found with bones. In Europe, with hearths. Here in Antarctica, there is only ice. And yet, if one day we could melt the glacier, not recklessly, but carefully, what would we find in that old moraine? Would there be more? Would the patterns reveal themselves as more than coincidence? Would the fragments multiply into meaning? For now, the evidence is too faint, too scattered. But still, it lingers. Some geologists believe that the ice, in its early stages, may have carried material from other continents, that perhaps these fragments were transported, not made here, But the surrounding rock doesn't support that. No foreign minerals, no trace of movement strong enough to explain the deposition. These pieces came from here, or very near. And so the suggestion remains, not as a declaration, but as a whisper, that someone once touched stone on this land, that they shaped it, gently, that they used it for something we no longer need, and then they left, or were left behind. There is comfort in their silence, a kind of companionship across time. They weren't shouting to be found. They weren't building to be remembered. They left behind only the trace of use, the echo of purpose, not glory, not ruin, just the smallest friction between hand and stone. And in a continent that tells its stories through shape and ice, perhaps that's all we can hope for. Not proof, not history rewritten, just the faintest outline of a presence. Something once warm and alive and thinking, and in that outline something else, a pattern in the ice, not at ground level, not in stone, but in the sky. Because as these fragments were studied, journals resurfaced, old ones, from a time when compasses failed near the pole, when navigators saw light where there should have been only dark, and the whispers. They weren't just in the stone. They had once been seen in the sky. There are places where the earth seems to forget its own rules, where needles spin without reason, where north isn't north, and silence feels watchful. In the early days of Antarctic exploration, navigators brought with them the most trusted tools of the age, sextants, star charts, and magnetic compasses. But here, at the bottom of the world, those tools faltered. The records begin in the 19th century, logbooks from sealers and whalers, then later from polar expeditions with names we still remember. They speak plainly at first, with the clinical tone of men trained to observe. Compass unstable. Needle drifted for several minutes before settling. Deviation increasing as we approach the plateau. At first, these notations were attributed to error, to weather, to inexperience. But the pattern grew. As expeditions pushed deeper into the interior, the instruments continued to misbehave. Needles veered without provocation. Field strengths fluctuated rapidly. Readings taken hours apart from the same location no longer aligned. Some teams turned to celestial navigation instead, trusting stars over magnetism. But even then, strange distortions appeared in the atmosphere. Auroras in places where none were expected. Faint flickers during times of supposed solar stillness. And beneath those flickers, quiet anomalies. Localized zones where magnetic fields surged or dipped, where birds, when they rarely appeared, circled erratically and vanished. Today we understand more about the South Magnetic Pole. We know it migrates, that it has wandered over time, tracing a long, slow arc across the continent. We know the Earth's magnetic field is fluid, born from molten iron deep within the core. It pulses, it shifts. But even within that understanding, Antarctica holds curiosities. There are regions where the magnetic crust appears heavier, densities of iron-rich rock hidden beneath the ice. But even these cannot fully explain the erratic data from certain zones. One such zone lies within Wilkes Land. Here, satellites have detected a massive anomaly, a gravitational disturbance so large and dense, it suggests a buried object roughly 300 kilometers across. Some say it's the remnant of an asteroid impact. Others suggest ancient geological formations. But the field around it behaves strangely. Compasses behave strangely, even now. Not in a cinematic way, not in spirals or flashes, but in deviations. Slight, persistent, odd. And it isn't just magnetic. Pilots flying high-altitude surveys have reported soft malfunctions. Instruments that freeze for seconds. Altimeters that drift slightly off. Nothing dangerous. Just enough to feel noticed. Some write it off as equipment aging poorly in the cold. Others leave it unmentioned. But among the logs, the pattern remains. And further back, before satellites, before airplanes, there were the lights. Accounts from early explorers describe them with reluctance. Unusual luminescence, pale arches in the east, circles of light over ice field. These weren't auroras, at least not as we know them. They appeared during solar minimums. They hovered lower. They didn't dance, but held steady, faint rings or beams, always soft, never bright. Some called them ice reflections. Others blamed atmosphere. But the consistency is curious. They appeared near anomalies, near fault zones, near ridges, and always in the company of compass errors. Some theories suggest piezoelectric effects, pressure on quartz-rich rock producing weak electromagnetic emissions. Others suggest geothermal interaction with magnetic minerals. But the field teams described something else. They described a feeling, as if the land was listening, as if the ice wasn't just beneath but around, surrounding them, enclosing them, not hostile, not alive, but aware. It's easy to dismiss feelings in science, to file them under fatigue, isolation, imagination, and perhaps that's all they were. But the compass does not feel. The compass does not imagine. It simply moves, or doesn't. And in Antarctica, sometimes it doesn't, or it moves in ways that speak of something deeper, not alien, not supernatural, just unmapped. There is a quiet hypothesis that certain mineral formations deep beneath the ice may form natural structures capable of emitting electromagnetic fields, not strong, but precise, that these could be remnants of ancient volcanic systems, or perhaps something older than volcanoes, older than drift, natural conductors, or deliberate ones. We may never know. The glacier above is too thick, the ice too proud of its silence, but the whispers continue, in the spin of a compass, in the flicker of light no camera can quite capture, in the hum of the instruments when everything else is still. They remind us that there is more to the land than shape. There is current, and that current seems drawn to particular places, places where no names remain, where coordinates replace memory, where the compass for just a moment forgets which way is home, and below that forgetting, below the places where light curls in silence, the map opens again, to an expedition larger than any before it, a journey not just of instruments, but of silence, of purpose shrouded in official reason, and a story we're only allowed to glimpse from fragments. In 1946, just after the end of a world war, the United States launched its largest Antarctic expedition to date. 13 ships, over 4,000 men, aircraft, equipment, supplies enough for months. They called it Operation Highjump. Officially, it was a scientific survey, an effort to map the frozen continent, test cold weather gear, and assert peaceful presence in a land untouched by conflict. But even from the beginning, the scale raised eyebrows. It was led by Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, a man already synonymous with polar exploration. But this wasn't a typical research mission. It moved with precision, with secrecy, and with speed. The ships fanned out along the coast. Aircraft swept over the interior. Teams established makeshift bases on the edge of the Ross ice shelf. And then something changed. Within 2 months, the mission was over. 6 months had been planned. But in early 1947, the fleet turned back. No explanation was offered. The official report cited weather, mechanical issues, changing priorities. But whispers grew in the vacuum. A plane had crashed, they said. Men were injured. Some may have died. Others disoriented. Technology failed in strange ways. Magnetic interference, again. Aircraft veering slightly off course. A sense of disorientation near certain ice formations. An odd spatial distortion no one could explain. Admiral Byrd, normally stoic and reserved, was quoted in a Chilean newspaper shortly after returning. He spoke of a need to prepare, that future conflicts could involve aircraft flying from pole to pole at incredible speeds. The quote was buried quickly, perhaps misinterpreted, perhaps never meant for publication, but it lingered, and with it, so did the stories. Some claimed sightings of unusual aerial lights, of things in the sky that moved too quickly, too smoothly, to be known aircraft. Others whispered of a breach, a place in the ice where something unnatural had been glimpsed, a structure, a cavity, a portal of some kind. These are stories, not confirmed facts. They live in the margins, in interviews and second-hand recollections, in classified documents still unreleased. But the mission's early end remains fact, and so does the silence that followed. Decades passed before another military operation of that scale returned to Antarctica, and in the years that followed, international treaties were drawn. The continent was declared a zone of peace. Research was welcomed, but limits were set. No weapons, no permanent bases, no digging too deep. Of course, science continued. Stations were built, ice cores drilled, satellites launched. But there was a subtle shift, a quietness around certain regions, especially in East Antarctica, especially near the magnetic anomalies, the buried ridges, the strange lights. Some suggest Operation Highjump found nothing. Others believe it found too much. But what is certain is this. After Highjump, the narrative around Antarctica changed. It was no longer just a place of adventure. It became sacred, off-limits, monitored. And perhaps that's how it should be. Not everything must be known. Not every place must be unsealed. But the maps from the expedition remain. Flight paths, photographs, grainy black and white images of shadows on ice, some dismissed as crevasses, others harder to explain. Long ridges, circular depressions, symmetries again, repeating forms that align with what satellite data would reveal decades later. The technology of 1946 could not see what we see now, but they felt it. That much is clear. The mission wasn't lost, but something in it was. Confidence, assumption, or perhaps just the comfort of certainty. Because Antarctica does not always give answers. Sometimes it gives questions, wrapped in frost, delivered through silence. And Highjump became part of that silence, a moment tucked into history not with bold font, but with soft erasure, mentioned, rarely explored, but in the memory of the ice and the anomalies it preserves, the echo of the expedition endures. And in that echo, something else rises. Reports of lights seen not from the ground, but from the air, moving, drifting, unexplained, not threatening, just there, soft, pale, and watching. They were first described as reflections, just the sun bouncing off ice, mirages perhaps, common in the polar regions, nothing to record, nothing to explain. But they returned, not often, not predictably, just enough to unsettle. Pilots flying over the Antarctic interior sometimes reported them, glows that hovered above the ice, too low to be auroras, too stable to be aircraft, pale orbs hanging in the air like distant moons. They didn't flicker or pulse. They moved slowly, deliberately, and then vanished. The reports were sparse, often undocumented, filed in personal journals or shared over camp meals, always with a nervous laugh. Because in science, you don't talk about lights, but some did. A flight crew in 1962 noted a formation, 3 lights in a triangle, following the aircraft at a distance before veering off. No radar contact, no weather balloon matches. In 1977, a Soviet field team observed a soft column of light rising from the ice, visible for nearly 6 minutes before fading upward into cloud. They were 60 miles from the nearest station. No atmospheric disturbance, no known cause. Even today, reports trickle in, geologists, engineers, station technicians, sightings spoken in quiet tones. They all begin the same way. I know it sounds strange, but the lights are never loud, never close. They don't chase or flash. They hover. They observe. Some say they're ball lightning, others reflections of solar activity in unusual atmospheric bands. But there's a quiet detail that repeats. The lights appear near anomalies, near the buried ridge, near the magnetic deviations, near the forgotten zones marked long ago in quiet, always at the edges of mapped certainty. They leave no scorch marks, no footprints, only memory. There's a theory, soft, fringe, rarely cited, that subglacial cavities with the right thermal and mineral conditions can generate atmospheric discharges. That piezoelectric stress, combined with rapid temperature shifts, might release energy into the air, visible as light. It's plausible, but it doesn't explain the movement, or the geometry, or why they appear only in certain places. One atmospheric physicist, now retired, wrote in a private letter that the lights were non-random, that over a decade of sightings plotted onto survey maps showed clustering, an arc, a curvature that seemed to follow not surface elevation, but something deeper. The ice below those sightings shared traits, thin zones, geothermal warmth, buried formations, not cities, not bases, just shapes. The lights don't speak, they don't return, they simply arrive. And then they don't. What remains is the silence that follows. The way the snow feels heavier after. The way sound seems briefly muffled. as if the sky is listening. For those who witness them, something changes, not belief, but awareness, a soft understanding that Antarctica is not simply frozen Earth. It's layered, watched perhaps, remembered, because the lights are not intrusive, they do not interfere. They only appear, then leave, as if satisfied with being seen. In some indigenous mythologies from the far north, lights in the sky were seen as souls, or messengers, not threatening, just passing through. Perhaps Antarctica has its own stories, but they're not spoken in language. They're whispered in frost, in movement, in light too soft to capture. There was one account, never published, of a crew who saw a ring, not a sphere, but a wide halo hovering silently above a plain of blue ice. It did not move. It simply pulsed, barely perceptible, like a breath in the air. Then, after 10 minutes, it blinked out. In the snow beneath it, nothing changed. No heat, no disturbance. Only the unsettling clarity that it had happened. And then the snow fell again, covering everything. Antarctica is like that. It erases, it does not destroy, it forgets gently, but the lights have been remembered by those who saw them, by those who kept the maps, by those who now cross-reference old sightings with new data and notice something quietly persistent, that the land may be reacting, or remembering, or simply pulsing with a rhythm we don't yet recognize. The lights are not proof. They are not explanation. They are an invitation to pause, to look again. And when we do, we notice the patterns aren't just in the air. They appear in the treaties, the territories, the decisions. Because soon after the sightings grew, the world agreed. Antarctica must remain untouched. No mining, no weapons, no private claims. And in that agreement, some believe, lies a message, not sent from above, but received from below. Because the lights might not come from the sky, they might rise from the ice. There are few places left on Earth where silence is protected, not by terrain or remoteness, but by choice, deliberate, written, signed. Antarctica is one of them. In 1959, a group of nations came together and did something rare. They agreed to leave a land alone. The Antarctic Treaty, signed at the height of the Cold War, suspended national claims. It prohibited military activity. It banned nuclear tests and the disposal of radioactive waste. It declared the entire continent a preserve for peace and science. No other region on Earth has been bound by such stillness. On the surface, the treaty is about cooperation, research stations, climate studies, shared knowledge. But beneath the legal language is something else, a decision not to dig too deeply. Not literally, not politically, not historically. Over time, more countries signed on, and the rules became more defined. No drilling into subglacial lakes without international approval. No biological sampling without full transparency. No satellite data shared without clearance. Some say it's caution, others call it stewardship. But even among scientists, there's a sense that some areas are better left undisturbed. There are zones marked as protected, not just for ecological reasons, but for geological ones. No building, no excavation, no footfall. Maps of the continent include blank spaces, places labeled as unexplored, even in the satellite era. In some cases, the data exists, but it's redacted, or archived, not hidden, just paused. There are stories, quiet ones, of private research groups denied permits, of survey equipment turned back, of planned expeditions quietly defunded when their routes approached certain coordinates. Officially, it's about safety, stability of the ice, preservation of fragile ecosystems, and it is. But for those who've been there, those who've stood at the edge of the great glaciers, where the wind hums like breath through a sleeping cave, there's something more. A presence, not of people, not even of life, but of memory, deep, buried, still breathing beneath the snow. Because Antarctica is not empty, it's sealed, and sealing is not the same as forgetting. The silence here is layered. There is the silence of snow, soft, relentless, falling in curtains. The silence of the wind, sharp but impersonal, and the silence of choice, not enforced, agreed upon, across politics, across decades. An unspoken understanding that something lies beneath that should not be disturbed. Perhaps it is only mystery. Perhaps it is only the last untouched space. but it feels curated, maintained, like a room in a house that everyone walks past but never opens. And as technology advances, drones, satellites, deep radar, artificial intelligence, the silence grows more deliberate. We can see further now, deeper. We know where the subglacial rivers run. We know the shape of the buried mountains. We even know the temperature differentials beneath the thickest ice. But we don't act on all we know. Not yet, because the land resists, not with violence, but with absence. The more we look, the more we see. Nothing. Just enough to feel presence, never enough to confirm it, and that is perhaps the greatest mystery of all. Not what's found, but what isn't. No ruins, no remains, no transmissions, only shapes, patterns, warmth, light, and silence, which to some is the loudest signal of all. Because if there was ever a place where knowledge was buried on purpose, where something was not erased but kept, this would be the land to do it, sealed in ice, wrapped in treaty, guarded by consensus. And as nations build telescopes here to watch the stars from a land that never sleeps, they also build nothing deeper. No tunnels, no mines, no foundations sunk into the ridge zones. The silence continues, preserved like the fossils of ancient ferns, kept but never touched. And in that hush, we begin to sense the shape of something more, not a civilization, not a species, but a decision made long ago. By whom, we don't know. To step back, to remain, to let the snow fall and cover everything. And now, beneath that vast decision, the ice waits, not idle, not empty, but still, because in some places the quiet isn't absence, it's protection. And from that protection, we drift next into the question that returns more often than any other. The shape, the form, the mask, golden, empty, and unnamed. It was not discovered in Antarctica, at least not directly. No excavation revealed it, no radar scan pointed it out. But it lingers, on shelves, in museums, in the minds of those who study lost things. A mask, golden, smooth, larger than any human face, without inscription, without origin. It appeared in a private collection in the early 20th century, acquired anonymously, catalogued under unknown provenance, pre-Ice Age. The label was speculative, the date unverified, but the shape it unsettled. It wasn't tribal, it wasn't ornamental. It lacked the stylized symmetry of ceremonial art. It was calm, expressionless, eyes not hollow, but softly closed, as if resting. The metal was tested, pure, untarnished. Not gold in the traditional sense, but something more complex. Alloys not known to any single region. Rare earth traces too evenly blended to occur naturally. No tool marks, no seams, as if it had been poured from a single thought. Scholars from multiple fields reviewed it. Archaeologists, metallurgists, historians. None could trace it to a known culture. None could place it. The mask vanished soon after, into private hands. Or perhaps a vault. Only sketches remain, photographs, grainy and aging, filed in quiet folders under miscellaneous anomalies. But it returned in other forms, in dreams, in remote viewing sessions, in stories told by those who'd never seen it, but described it in exact detail. A smooth face, a closed expression, a silence that felt watching. Some believed it was real, others symbolic, an embodiment of what was buried, what had chosen stillness over memory. In Antarctica, the idea of the mask began to appear in art. Field researchers, after long seasons on the ice, would draw versions of it, unprompted. It surfaced in snow carvings, in notebook margins. Always the same, simple, smooth, present. It became less an object and more a shape, a motif, the image of something that waited. And still, there were whispers, rumors of a satellite scan from the early 2000s showing a symmetrical structure beneath the ice near Dome C, 2 ovoid indentations spaced like eyes, a rise in the center, too large for a sculpture, too regular to be ice. The data was retracted, the coordinates no longer available, but those who saw the printout remember, because the dimensions matched. Some say the mask is not a thing, but a metaphor, a way the earth hides what it holds, a face placed over truth to allow time its silence. Others believe it's a key, not to a door, but to an idea. that perhaps there were once people, beings, who knew the cycle of warmth and cold, who understood the rise and fall of ice, and instead of building skyward, built inward, that the mask was not worn, but left, as a message or a mirror, and in that mirror we see something familiar, not ancient, not alien, just quiet, as if what lies beneath the ice is not waiting to be found, but waiting to be remembered. The mask reappears in cultures far from the poles, in myths of watchers, of guardians, of those who never died but simply stepped aside. And now, as we measure Antarctica in frequencies and reflections, the image rises again, a signature in sonar, a shape in shadow, not a face but a suggestion of one, not a relic but an echo. And maybe that's all we need. Because masks are not just for hiding. They are for protecting, for preserving identity through time. And this one, if it exists at all, has done just that. No name, no language, just form. Enough to endure, enough to wonder, enough to carry us forward, to the messages never answered, to the letters sealed in stone, to the voices that may have once called out across the world. In the ruins of ancient cities, we find fragments of thought, carved into clay, etched onto stone, pressed into tablets and left for someone, anyone, to read. Most are administrative, records, inventories, but some are personal, appeals, petitions, letters, and among these one set of tablets stands apart. They were uncovered in what is now modern-day Egypt, in a place once called Akhenaten, built by a pharaoh who worshipped the sun and then was forgotten. The tablets are known as the Amarna letters, over 300 of them, written in cuneiform, exchanged between Egyptian rulers and other kingdoms across the ancient Near East. They speak of trade, marriage, diplomacy, and war. But one letter reads differently. It is unsigned, unfinished, its author unnamed, its destination unclear. It was written by a woman. This much we know from the grammar, the titles. A queen, a widow, someone of great power who had just lost her husband. She wrote not in sorrow, but in desperation. She offered herself, not in mourning, but in alliance. She asked the king of a foreign land to send her a son so that she might marry him and retain her throne. She begged. She pleaded not to be given to a servant, not to be cast aside. She needed a ruler beside her, a king, and she offered her kingdom in return. The letter was found among others, untranslated at first, filed away. But when scholars finally read it, they paused, because it was unlike anything else. No queen of Egypt had ever asked such a thing. No Egyptian ruler had ever begged a foreigner to send a prince. It didn't fit. Speculation rose. Some said the letter was a forgery. Others said it must have come from a minor vassal. But the tablet was authentic. Its language, Babylonian Akkadian, was standard diplomatic script. And the seal was Egyptian, real, undeniable. The identity of the queen has never been confirmed. Some believe it was Ankhesenamun, widow of Tutankhamun. Others say it could have been Nefertiti, reborn in a new name. Whoever she was, her plea was never answered. The prince was sent, but he never arrived. He died, on the road, or by design, and the queen disappeared from history. The letter remains, not as evidence, as echo. A voice sent out into the dark, across language and land, asking to be seen, asking not for rescue, but for partnership. And as we trace this letter, we wonder how many others were sent only to vanish. How many messages have been written in stone, in sound, in movement, meant not for gods, but for time, because Antarctica has no tablets, no scrolls, no known writing, but perhaps it too is a letter, not in words, but in placement, in its silence, its symmetry, its preservation. If a people once lived here in the age before ice, if they foresaw the cold, would they not have written something, not in ink, but in shape, in placement, in signal, something meant not to last in memory but in matter, a letter meant to be discovered only when the reader was ready, when the tools were quiet enough, when the questions became soft. We are those readers now, holding fragments, maps, masks, patterns. We are not certain, we are not entitled to answers, but we are listening, and the more we listen, the more we sense the messages were never lost, only paused, only waiting. Because some voices do not speak loudly, they do not announce, they do not cry out. They murmur through soil, through heat, through glacial pulses, like old letters unearthed from dust, not asking us to know, but to remember that something once was. And in that remembering something stirs. A hand, a brush stroke, a carving on the wall of a palace now buried beneath miles of frozen stone. The hand of an artist who saw more than kings, who saw feeling, who saw connection, and who drew it once in a forgotten capital. A face, a touch, a softness never seen before in empire, and never seen again. In a desert once filled with light, far from the cold breath of the south, an artist picked up a chisel and did something unexpected. He carved tenderness, not triumph, not divinity, not the usual poses of power. He carved a family, a king, yes, but seated, relaxed, a queen, not standing behind, but beside him, children, wiggling, reaching, laughing, held in loving arms. The stone did not glorify war. It didn't flatten the face into godhood. It lingered on the curve of a cheek, the tilt of a head, the gentle weight of a small body resting in a mother's lap. This was Amarna art, born during the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten. For just a moment in history, Egypt shifted. It turned its temples not to many gods, but to one, Aten, the sun disk. And with that shift came a change in everything. Language, politics. The artist, whose name is forgotten, was permitted, or perhaps inspired, to see differently. To see royalty not as eternal statues, but as breathing people. To draw laughter. To sculpt closeness. The scenes were strange, too human, too real. The heads were elongated. The bodies soft and sloped. Not idealized. Not meant to impress, but to feel. Some say the figures were symbolic, that the style was spiritual, abstract, but others believe it was honest, too honest, because after Akhenaten's death, everything changed again. His city, Akhetaten, was abandoned. His name was erased from monuments. His god was outlawed, and the art stopped. Images of his family were shattered. Reliefs were chipped away. The gentle curves were buried beneath layers of official silence. It wasn't just political correction, it was removal. And among those erased was the artist. No signature survives, no record. Just the work, scattered fragments dug up centuries later, their softness still intact. And it makes you wonder, what did he see? What was he trying to preserve? Not information, not propaganda, but something deeper. Something that could only be communicated through gesture, through expression. A kind of memory, perhaps not even his own. Perhaps he was copying something older. Perhaps those curves, those gentle limbs and reaching hands, came not from imagination, but from memory, from a story passed down, from a figure remembered only in outline, a woman who ruled, a man who walked beside her, a child who held both their hands. The artist may not have known the names, but he remembered the feeling, and that feeling guided the chisel. That feeling survived the erasure. Because some truths do not need names. They live in shape, in line, in the quiet space between two figures drawn too close for politics, too soft for monuments. And as we look at the fragments now, sun-bleached, museum-bound, we feel that truth echo. The artist saw something, and in seeing it perhaps saw too much. Because honesty is dangerous. It breaks the narrative. It opens questions. It remembers more than it should. But the ice is the same. It too preserves in shape, in subtlety. It too holds outlines that do not fit the usual script. And maybe, just maybe, Antarctica is the world's Amarna. A quiet detour from the official story. A place where something else was once tried. Lived, drawn, and then removed. Not because it failed, but because it didn't match what came after. So it was buried. By snow, by law, by time. But like the stone reliefs in ruined temples, it waits, software unbroken, still humming with the hands that shaped it. And those hands, if they ever held tools, if they ever wrote names, may have built more than cities. They may have built a place, a capital, not in Egypt, not in memory, but far south, now gone, now ice. And as we walk the empty streets of a modern ghost town, one built quickly, abandoned gently, we feel how memory lingers in structure, in alignment, in empty thresholds, in wind moving through vanished windows, because a city does not disappear. It fades. And sometimes, if you listen closely, it begins again. Cities do not vanish all at once. They thin. They shed. They settle into silence one doorway at a time. Akhetaten was one such city, raised by Akhenaten in the sands of Egypt, then left behind as if waking from a dream. Its walls still stand, though low. Its streets still trace patterns beneath drifting earth. But the energy that built it, the purpose, evaporated like morning mist. And what if there were others, capitals not remembered, not even mentioned? Because they stood in places that do not offer ruins, only ice. Antarctica gives no footprints. It does not preserve beams or bricks, but it holds shape. In some regions near the center of the continent, faint outlines have been observed, patterns traced by radar deep beneath the ice, grids, right angles, shadowed depressions that run parallel, spaced evenly apart, not jagged like riverbeds, not curved like glaciers. They do not scream architecture, but they do not whisper nature either. In one particular zone, beneath hundreds of meters of ice in Queen Maud Land, satellite imaging picked up a rectangular anomaly nearly 2 kilometers long, buried, unmoving, consistent across scans. It was dismissed quickly. A glitch, an ice formation, nothing more. But the region was flagged, quietly, flights diverted, drilling restricted, research postponed. It remains unnamed. To the public, there is no city, only snow, always snow. But those who study ancient cities know something different. They know how memory lingers in layout, how streets curve toward meaning, how even in ruin, alignment speaks. Capitals are not just walls. They are choices, where the light falls, where the water runs, where the center holds. And Antarctica, in its warm past, had all of these. Rivers that no longer flow, sun that no longer reaches, mountains that once sheltered. What if, in one of those valleys, something rose? Not stone, not marble, something better suited to the time, structures grown from the land, aligned to warmth, open to sky. And when the freeze came, they didn't crumble. They were covered, not destroyed, preserved, a capital without a name, a city that did not resist winter, but surrendered to it, like a body curling beneath a blanket, knowing the thaw would be long in coming. Some researchers point to unusual thermal signatures in these areas, localized heat not explained by geology, too small for magma, too focused to be natural. Others notice wind behavior, the way the katabatic flows bend slightly, unnaturally, over certain plateaus, as if brushing against something not seen. But again, the maps are clean, the data withheld, the silence maintained, and so the capital vanishes, not from existence, from record. Erased not by erasure, but by omission, because there is no evidence, no signs, no names, only the faint sense of organization, the way a certain stretch of land resists randomness, the way something old once made sense there. And in this, Antarctica becomes more than forgotten, it becomes deliberate. Like Akhetaten, it may have been built not for eternity, but for a moment, a flowering, a flare of warmth and presence before the cold took hold. But unlike Akhetaten, there are no texts, no prayers etched into stone, only ice, only shape. And so the capital remains not in history books, but in gentle data, lines and shadows and temperature maps that almost say something, then fall quiet again. Perhaps it was never a capital in our sense. Perhaps it had no king, no palace, only purpose, a gathering place, a site of balance, a city that tuned itself to the planet, to the stars, to the breath of something deeper. And when the age ended, it let itself be buried, like a secret sent forward in time, not to be found, to be felt. And now we walk above it, unknowingly. We camp in tents where doorways once stood. We fly over rooftops now encased in miles of ice. And we call it blank. We call it lifeless. But sometimes in the stillness between wind gusts, something presses back from below. A feeling, a form, not loud, not even conscious. Just presence, and presence needs no proof, only listening, only returning. Every civilization leaves a thread. It winds through lineage, through story, through structure. It ties past to present, king to child, builder to keeper. But sometimes the thread is cut. Sometimes a line ends, not violently, not in flame, but in hush. A ruler dies, a city quiets, and nothing follows. In ancient Egypt, dynasties crumbled when heirs failed. In Mesopotamia, bloodlines dissolved into the dust of conquest. Even in Rome, the absence of succession whispered an empire's decay. And in Antarctica, if there was once a line, it is gone. No descendants, no torch passed, no echo of names, only structures in shadow, warmth beneath ice, and the sense that something stopped. Those who study ancient collapse speak of many signs: disrupted climate, weakened resources, isolation, internal silence. But here, no signs survive, just a feeling of departure. It's as if the last voices did not fade. They stepped away, not extinguished, withdrawn. We search for remnants, for graves, for residue of ending. But Antarctica offers only pause. A ridge with no record. A map with no mark. A silence not empty, but deliberate, like a page left blank at the close of a chapter. And this break, the one no one speaks of, feels heavier than any ruin, because to vanish without trace is rare. To vanish without air, rarer still. If there were people here, conscious, organized, enduring, then what happened when the cold came? Did they retreat? Did they wait too long? Or did they understand something we do not? Perhaps they saw the freeze not as threat, but as final note. A choice to seal rather than fight, to let go not in panic, but with peace. Some cultures believe the greatest wisdom lies not in survival, but in surrender. To know when to step aside, to become memory. And if such a culture ever touched Antarctica, perhaps this is what they left us. Not inheritance, not technology, but silence. A reminder that legacy is not always continuation. Sometimes it's preservation. And that preservation is profound, because the line may have broken, but the shape remains, not through blood, but through form, in the architecture of ice, in the breath of valleys never fully closed. We measure this in absence. No child carried the name forward, no script etched the stories, but something deeper endured, a kind of patience, a design that did not seek permanence, but timing. And now, thousands of years later, we feel it, in the faint warmth below, in the strange precision of structures never built again, in the way nothing here was ever rebuilt, because nothing replaced it. The cold came, the wind rose, and the land chose not to resist. This, too, is a form of legacy, to know when to let the line end, to honor a truth by allowing it to rest, to carry no burden into the next age. And now, as we trace their outlines with satellite and scan, we inherit not their blood, but their silence. We are not their children, we are their readers, their witnesses, and in that we are not alone, because there are bones beneath this place, not fossilized creatures, not humans, but others, still, mummified and cold, unmoving, unnamed, the breath of a world that exhaled and never inhaled again. We do not disturb them, we do not find them, but we feel their stillness, in the caverns, in the subglacial quiet, in the places where air no longer moves. A presence, a completion. The line that broke did not fall. It bowed, and beneath that bowed silence a question rises, not about who they were, but about what they became, and whether, in letting go, they ascended. Some traditions don't survive through armies or kings. They endure through presence, through hands that light fires, voices that recite in low tones, movements repeated not for power, but for remembering. The priesthood, across time and cultures, has always been this. Not rulers, not builders, but holders, keepers of rhythm, of alignment, of stories not written, but passed through posture, symbol, silence. And in Antarctica, if such a memory ever existed, it may have survived not through legacy, but through stillness. Long after the cities fell, long after the warmth left, long after the last lines were broken, perhaps someone stayed, not to lead, to tend, to mark the cycle, to guard the close. We do not know if they were people, or if they moved as we do, but across the quiet plateaus and buried ridges, there are signs not of construction, but of care. Small zones where geothermal heat persists, not by chance, but in near-perfect symmetry. Rings of melt, repeating intervals, as if the ice itself remembers a pattern once walked in ceremony. Not worship, but recalibration, because where power fails, rhythm endures. The planet breathes in cycles, and the priesthood, wherever it arose, understood this. In Egypt, they aligned temples to stars, in India to breath, in Mesoamerica to shadow, and in this cold continent, perhaps to silence. One ring formation, visible only through ice-penetrating radar, measures nearly a mile across. It's too perfect for erosion, too circular to dismiss. It surrounds nothing. It leads to nowhere. But in the center, the ice is warmer, softer, a breath in the still chest of the world. We think of priesthoods as voices, chants, fires in dark halls. But what if they were quieter than that? What if they held memory not in language, but in arrangement? Stones aligned, pathways preserved, movements repeated long after meaning was lost, until even the repetition itself became sacred, until the act of keeping became its own knowing. Some scientists have begun to speak quietly of cognitive geology, the idea that human memory, cultural structure may once have informed landscape itself, that terrain can be shaped by belief, that ritual leaves not just ruins, but resonant zones. And Antarctica, untouched by war, unbroken by agriculture, offers the cleanest slate for detecting such residue. The findings are early, tentative, but in multiple zones beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet, there are gravity anomalies arranged with curious precision, not mass concentrations from impact, not mineral seams, but distributed nodes, equidistant, arranged, waiting. What could they be? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps the planet's own rhythm. Or perhaps the remnants of a priesthood that understood not how to control the world, but how to honor it. Not through monuments, through presence. There's an old belief passed down through the mystics of many traditions that knowledge kept in silence becomes wisdom, that when a teaching is too vast for speech, it is buried, not to be hidden, but to be held, until the earth is ready again. Antarctica may be that holding, a continent-sized memory, sealed in breath, and the priesthood, if it still echoes, might not live in bones or names, but in alignment, in the way the ice flows around certain shapes, in the way the wind still curls over forgotten ridges with respect, because not all teachers speak, not all lessons are loud, and sometimes what remains in the deepest cold is not emptiness, but trust, that someone someday would come close enough to listen, not to open, not to claim, but to feel, and perhaps to remember. Some sounds never fade. They do not ring out. They do not crash or cry. They hum, quietly, steadily, just beneath perception. Antarctica carries such an echo. It is not in its wind, though the wind whispers. It is not in its ice, though the ice creaks and flows. It is not in the data, though the data holds patterns. It is in the feeling, a low vibration sensed more than heard, felt more than proved. Explorers speak of it sometimes, not in scientific reports, but around evening meals, when the cold softens and the silence grows thick. They describe standing alone in open whiteness, hundreds of miles from any human sound, and hearing something, a hum, a pull, a memory not their own. It isn't music, it isn't language, but it has rhythm. And rhythm, even without words, carries meaning. In certain subglacial zones, instruments detect steady vibrations. Not earthquakes, not shifts. Resonance, long, sustained waves moving through rock and ice. Too deep for microphones. Too regular for random. Some match harmonic frequencies found in ancient instruments. Others align with measurements from other sacred sites across the globe. Stone circles, temples, caves. Coincidence? Perhaps. But when resonance repeats, we listen. We feel it most in places where the ice is thickest, where no light has touched in millions of years, where warmth rises not from magma, but from intention. That is where the echo stirs, not like a voice, more like a presence adjusting in sleep, not alive in the way we understand life, not gone in the way we understand death, held, still. Some have called it the pulse beneath, others, the deep tone. One researcher simply wrote, "It feels like the earth is remembering something," because that's what an echo is, a returning. It does not originate. It replies. And in this echo, something replies from long before our calendars began, Perhaps from a civilization, perhaps from a thought, perhaps from the planet itself, keeping its own memory beneath its coldest veil. This is not the kind of mystery that demands solving. It doesn't seek discovery, it seeks reverence. Because the echo is fragile, too much interference, and it fades, too much certainty, and it stills. So we step lightly, we place sensors gently, we trace the frequencies, we record, we wonder, and we find ourselves changed. Because to stand above such stillness, to feel something speak without sound, is to know how little we know. It is to sense that beneath our search for ruins, artifacts, and proof, something waits that does not need recognition. Only remembering, the echo does not seek audience. It simply is. The residue of a capital never named, a priesthood never buried, a warmth never extinguished. It hums through the bones that remain, through the cities that fell, through the treaties that forbade return, and in that hum is something close to truth. Not history, not science, not myth, but the quiet assurance that the past never truly leaves. It rests, and sometimes, when the moment is still enough, when the wind calms and the equipment sleeps, it stirs again. There are rulers we remember because they demanded it. They carved their names into stone, built monuments tall enough to cast shadows across centuries. But sometimes, the most powerful sovereigns are the ones who stepped aside, not in weakness, in choice. In Antarctica's deep and folding hush, if ever there was a sovereign, their crown was not made of gold. It was silence, not submission, stillness. They ruled nothing by force. No armies marched for them. No cities spread outward in conquest. And yet, everything may have flowed from them. Because this land carries signs not of dominion, but of design. Shape without signature, warmth without hearth, presence without proclamation. It does not behave like empire, it behaves like offering. A place calibrated, aligned, woven with intention so subtle it escaped notice for millennia. And at the heart of that intention, perhaps, was someone, not a pharaoh, not a prophet, a sovereign of a different kind, one who saw the coming cold and did not resist it, one who saw the world tilt and did not try to hold it back, one who knew that sometimes the truest legacy is not what you build, but what you allow to be buried. This sovereign may not have ruled alone. They may have ruled with a council or a chorus, or perhaps simply as a point of stillness around which others moved. No image of them survives, no tomb, no inscription, but their outline flickers through every anomaly, every softened ridge, every pattern too regular for chaos. They appear in maps not drawn, in melodies sensed between seismic pulses, in the way warmth pools beneath the glacier like a breath held just a moment longer than expected. We do not know their name. Perhaps they had none. Perhaps they gave it away. Because to slip the script is to know the story you've been written into, and to step beyond it. To leave behind the need to be remembered, to create something more permanent than memory, a land, a pattern, a resonance. Some say the sovereign ascended, others that they dissolved into the land they loved. Perhaps both, perhaps neither. Perhaps they rest still, beneath the deepest sheet, beneath the cleanest cold, not entombed, but cradled. Not dead, but paused. Awaiting not for resurrection, but for recognition, not of who they were, but of what they chose. Stillness over spectacle, preservation over power, and that is why we still feel them. Not in relics, in rhythm, a curvature here, a signal there, a warmth that shouldn't be, but is. That's how sovereigns endure when they no longer need to rule. They become part of the script that follows, the one that can't be erased, the one told in the hush of wind above a frozen lake, in the hum that runs beneath tectonic plates, in the questions that wake us in the night, not to terrify, but to open. What if someone once knew the world's turning not as a threat, but as a dance? What if they stepped out of history so they could become its silence? And what if now we are simply catching up, not to their face, but to their shape? The sovereign who slipped the script may never be named, but in the echo of warmth beneath ice, in the soft refusal of Antarctica to yield its secrets loudly, they remain. And in that remaining, we do not solve them. We sense them, and we walk on, quieter. Stillness is not the absence of movement. It is the presence of balance. A moment held, not out of paralysis, but purpose, not frozen by fear, but suspended by choice. In Antarctica, stillness is everywhere. It lives in the sheets of ice that have not cracked in centuries, in the wind that sometimes simply stops, in the sunlight that lingers, unblinking, for weeks. It is not empty. It is full of echoes, of memory, of patterns carved in a tongue we are only beginning to hear. The forgotten city, if that's what it was, does not shout. It does not rise to meet us, but it waits. Its corridors may lie beneath miles of ice, but the stillness remains soft, not sharp, inviting, not forbidding. You feel it in the air, in the way footsteps don't echo here, but sink, in the way sound seems to fold inward, like a room designed to hold whispers. Stillness was part of its design, not just as protection, but as expression. Because there's a kind of civilization that does not race to expand, but deepens, one that does not reach outward, but inward, where growth is measured not in walls or weapons, but in quiet understanding, where the heart of a people beats not in victory, but in alignment. And what if this place, beneath all our instruments and ideas, was exactly that, a place where silence was sacred, where resonance mattered more than recognition, where the earth's own pulses were understood as language? That stillness still lingers. It is not haunted. It is not lost. It is choosing to remain, to stay unseen until seen differently, to speak only to those who listen slowly. Stillness like this is not an absence. It is a presence so profound that it does not need to declare itself. It simply is. A warmth beneath ice, a curvature too perfect, a hum no storm can erase. And we, stumbling toward knowledge with devices and dates, must learn to meet it not with conquest, but quiet. Because in stillness things reveal themselves on their own time. We cannot mine it, we cannot map it, we cannot take from it what it is not yet ready to give. We can only be with it, acknowledge it, feel it. And in so doing something shifts, not in the ice, in us. The presence of a quiet civilization, whether it ruled, worshipped, or simply waited, asks us not to believe but to feel, to let go of urgency, to rest in wonder, to imagine not just what was, but how it might have felt, and to carry that stillness forward into how we build, into how we move, into how we remember. Because even if nothing is ever found beneath Antarctica, no tools, no walls, no name, stillness itself is a legacy, and it lives. In the hush before a snowdrift settles, in the pulse that continues beneath the crust, in the questions that open us, instead of closing answers. Some stories are not meant to end. They are meant to settle. Like dust on old stone, like ice on forgotten paths, like breath just before it exhales again. No great civilization announces its return with thunder. The old ones, if they return at all, do so with a sigh, a breath beneath the ice, a tremble too soft for machines but felt, perhaps, in dreams. We stand now at the edge of knowledge. Maps have grown full, satellites hum overhead, yet still, beneath it all, there is a quiet that cannot be mapped. Antarctica remains, not passive, but present, not resisting us, but not yielding either. And in that, there is a lesson. Some truths are not unlocked, they are invited, and some invitations require silence in return. So if ever you walk a frostbitten field or trace the coastline of a white continent with your thoughts, listen, not with ears, but with stillness. Let the questions drift like snow. Because the lost are not always gone, some simply wait, not to be found, but to be remembered differently, and in that remembering something ancient may open, not a doorway, not a ruin, but a feeling, the breath beneath the ice. Still there, still warm, still waiting. You've just drifted through the hush of something ancient, not a tale of conquest, not a saga of certainty, but a gentle descent into the possibility that history holds more than it tells. If your heart stirred at the thought of a hidden legacy beneath the ice, if something in the stillness felt familiar, then perhaps some stories don't need proof to be real. They only need remembering. Here in History Dream State, we don't rush, we don't solve, we wonder. We walk softly through the corridors time left unlit, and sometimes we listen long enough to hear what was almost forgotten. If this journey resonated, press that subscribe button and stay close. There are more echoes to follow, more silence to listen through. Until next time, rest gently, and let the past keep whispering.